even at significant expense to yourself. It might be really painful, right? It's not like we can just write a check and move on. This might actually be, hey, we've got a decision to make. We can make this right, or we can make payroll. How do you react to that, right? Are you going to make it right?
If you don't have the reputation of doing that work well, and you're introduced to somebody new, especially coming from another region, good luck trying to land that business, because I'll give them the best price. If they haven't seen your work and seen you do it, they're very uncomfortable.
Welcome to Beyond the Start. My name is Lliam Holmes. I'm with MIS Solutions. And today we have Andy Cheatham, who is part of the fire sprinkler system. And he is here to talk to us a little bit about his journey, which is extended now over 34 years with a company called Advantage Fire. And so, Andy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad we're here today.
With that, Andy, why don't you tell us a little bit about Advantage Fire and when you started and how you got started and maybe even why you started the company to begin with?
Well, Advantage Fire is a full-service fire protection organization. We started in the spring of 1992. I worked for a company called Selasco Corporation in Stone Mountain, and it's kind of cut my teeth there. 6 of the 6.5 years I was in management, so I got a pretty good head start there on that. And then we started with 4 people in the spring of 92, and we're up to about 175 now. That equates to about 80 vehicles on the road, which is always interesting in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's the macro look at it.
All right, cool. Hey, I'm really curious, what made you want to start a business? Why didn't you just go work for somebody? Because it'd have been a lot easier.
Well, and for me, one of the reasons I got an engineering degree at Clemson and I went back to night school and got an MBA is I wanted diversified education because I wanted to have my own. I didn't know the timing. I didn't know how it would work out, but that was something I always had in the back of my mind, even when I was at college, when I was getting my bachelor's degree. So it was a desire I always had.
Was it, if you kind of think back to 1992, was there an event, was there a thing that happened that you're like, now's the time, today's the day? Like what pushed you over the edge?
The company that I worked for out of college in the fall of 91 filed for bankruptcy.
Okay.
And they talked big about it being the reorganization form of bankruptcy because they had intentions of coming out the other side. Well, you know anything about commercial construction, it's not the easiest type of organization to bring out the other side of a bankruptcy. And sure enough, I stayed on purpose for 5 or 6 months because I wanted the education of the bankruptcy. I wanted to see how bad it got.
Okay.
And then finally it got bad enough where we had to go because it started hurting our personal reputations, the things we had to do to stay there. So that's what it really, we got kicked out into, we either had to get a job or start a company.
So, so many people I talk to, something happens, they get fired, they get laid off, bankrupt, something happens and they end up without a job. And just like you, right? You have 2 choices. I'm either going to use that as an opportunity to go and start my own thing, or I'm going to go put my resume together and I'm going to start another position somewhere, right? And so it sounded like to you, like this was the motivation, this was the opportunity. And in your case, it almost sounds like you were waiting for that opportunity, right?
No doubt. And my eventual business partner, I had unknowingly hired 15 months before the bankruptcy. And we already had an employee at the old company that got me to interview him. And I had no idea whether he grew up poor or rich or whatever you want to call it. And turns out he grew up pretty well off. So his dad was able to provide us with the amount of, it wasn't a lot of capital, but a lot of people, it was an amount of money that most people don't have sitting around.
Okay.
So the access to that capital helped too, because it's difficult. I can't speak for other businesses, but in commercial construction, they don't pay you very fast. So it takes a little capital to get started.
So he kind of acted as the bank. He
built the bank.
kind of floating you some money to get started.
That's exactly. And a real quick funny story, about 2 or 3 years later, the IRS knocked on our doors and, where'd this capital come from? Because, most people don't have that kind of money sitting around. And once they came in, we had audited, they found out real quick that Dalton's Dairy had a little bit of money, so they left us alone.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. And so if you think back, day one, week one, month one, year one, right? How did you actually get started? Right? Did you go out and rent a building? Did people just work from their house? Did you just show up at Waffle House on a Tuesday? Like think back, like how did you actually get started?
We had a company at the time that was one of our clients, and it was called Rayco General Contractors. They're not near as prevalent now as they were back then, even earlier than that. But anyway, they had an office park in Gwinnett County called Gwinnett 316, and they leased industrial space. And I called Nancy because I knew she was the leasing agent for Rayco, and I told her we only needed a little bit to start out. And we actually leased 4,000 square feet, and 2,000 of it was warehouse and 2,000 of it was office. And we started with 4 employees. And by the end of the first month, we had 9. And then this is important. This was one of our first big decisions. The company that we left, I thought they'd make it longer than they did. But the bank locked their doors 4 months to the day after we left. We left on April 4th. On August 4th, SunTrust bolted the door to Selasco. And the problem with that is we didn't have enough work yet to hire. There were still 8 or 10 people over there that we wanted on our payroll. And we didn't have the work to support them. So we had to make a decision whether to take those people on. Because once you let them go to the marketplace, it's going to cost you $2 or $3 an hour more to get them back. So we bit the bullet and took them on. So we went from 4 to 9 to 18 in about 100 days. And that was a big bite, because what helped us there, one more thing I'll say, Selasco still had a certain amount of work going on. So we assumed those jobs because Selasco was gone. So we took over those jobs, and that kind of bridged us over on the payroll with the 9 new employees we brought on.
And Selasco was okay with you taking this? I mean, I guess they had to be because they were gone, right?
No, they were out of business.
And so you guys just took over or picked up where they left off, just maybe the smaller scale and size, right?
Yes.
Right. Well, that was probably really helpful because, the number one thing I hear is, hey, I can do the thing, whatever that thing is, but gosh, how do I get new customers? How do we, do I need to hire a sales guy? Do I, I'm not really good at going to networking events and finding people, and customers. And so a lot of what I hear from entrepreneurs that are either thinking about starting up or that just started is they're really worried about that revenue and trying to figure out how they're going to get that first customer, maybe the first couple of customers, right?
And the one thing that helped us, of the 4 people that we started with, I was really the only, for lack of a better term, administrative personnel. Well, personnel only was going to do that full time. The other 3 guys were sales estimators. Doug Mitchell had a lot of clients in the industrial marketplace. Reed Engel had a lot of customers in other parts of new construction. And Dalton, my partner, had all my old customers in tenant finish. So I would encourage people, start with your salespeople because they're the ones that feed everybody else.
So that's a good question. So there were 4 of you. You had a back office guy, and you had 3 sales guys. Who did the work?
Well, we the next week we hired Johnny Cody, Kirk Johnson, and Steve Nix. They were our first 3 field guys because we didn't, when you start, you don't have any work. And then you sell something, you go, oh my God, who's going to put it in? So that's why we started hiring the field guys. So the only other non-field person we hired, Lliam knows Becky, who still works for us 34 years later. She was our first support person. And we hired her 3 weeks. We handled the phones and all for a whole 3 weeks before we got tired of that. And we hired Becky. Again, she still is. But everybody else we hired from then on was basically field personnel to support what the 3 salesmen were selling.
Cool. So if you think back 34 years ago, however long it's been, and you think about those early days and you kind of put yourself in that mindset and you kind of reflect on that back from where you are today, what is maybe one or two things you wished that you'd even known or maybe had done different?
I think when you're in that space, again, you're only 4,000 feet, it was, you got so much on your plate day to day that you spend your energy getting through that day, that week, and that month. And you kind of lose sight of future and where you're headed. And you don't realize the growth potential that you have. It's more than you think. And we should have realized that when Selasco closed up. They left a lot of work out there on the streets of Atlanta that we could have even gotten more of it if we would have been more aggressive at the time. So we wanted to grow. We didn't necessarily want to grow fast, but we could have been a little more open-minded to the future then.
So maybe there was, at least in your case, there was an opportunity.
Yeah.
That you feel like you weren't able to fully take advantage of. Not because you couldn't have, but you just didn't maybe have enough vision because you were so busy running a day-to-day in your business that you would literally walk right past it.
No, and you in the back of your mind, you're like, do I have the capital to go to the next level and the next level and the next level? Because it's expensive to grow. I don't know. Where no matter, even at 34 years old, it still costs money to grow. It takes capital.
Yeah. And a lot of people, you've heard this too, I'm sure, right? A lot of people grow themselves right into bankruptcy, right?
No doubt about it.
And so it is that balance between, how are we growing effectively and efficiently while not overstretching ourselves to a point where we can't afford to pay our bills.
And that's a day in, day out, week in, week out shot you call, because you got to make payroll that week, but there's a future coming.
No doubt, no doubt. And so if you kind of take that, you fast forward a couple of years, I think you guys started to do things a little bit different. Now, in full transparency, to everybody, gosh, Andy, I've known at least more than 2 decades, right? And so it's fair to say, like, we've met, right? Like, we're friends, like, we know what's up, right? And so I've got to witness some of that journey. And, we were much smaller than you guys. And so you guys have always been one of those companies that we looked up to and we're like, we're not there yet. But just like you did when you were at Selasco, we were like, well, let's learn the lessons that we can, because one day we're going to have their problems and let's see how they handle it as they go through it. Right. And so I kind of think through that and I'm thinking, as you guys kind of move forward a couple of years into your business, one of the things that you did is you went back and you got your MBA. I can tell you that that's probably something I wish I had done, right? I didn't, I was like you, right? I was so busy running the day-to-day, serving customers, developing products, trying to position our company, trying to get new clients, trying to make payroll, right? I was so busy in the day-to-day that I never really thought about, going back to school and getting education as a CEO, right? Not as an engineer, because all of my time and effort was always spent about being best engineering and providing those solutions to our customers. But you didn't. You went back to school, you got your MBA. And I think, one of the conversations you and I had was, if you look across all of your competitors, no one else at any other company had an MBA, right? And so I think starting right from that decision, you guys started to be a different company. I'd love for you to kind of share your thoughts and insights about, like, what made you think to go do that?
For me personally, it was diversity in my education. Professionally, it opens up your mind about what the possibilities are. And I'll use the IT space as an example. When you're growing, we used a lot of mom and pop IT support people when we were the 3.5 years we were in Lawrenceville. When we built our own building out in Decula and moved out there when we were 3.5 years old, because we were on top of each other in Lawrenceville, the guy we hired at the time, he was a Lone Ranger too. We had 2 roll around carts in Marksville, the PCs on that we bought at a store that's not even in existence. And he actually put a what was called a LAN system in back when we moved. We moved in that facility in December 1st of 95. And we thought we'd hit the mothership because we had computers that were interconnected. We didn't have to roll around carts anymore. And when we found out, the more we tried to stay with the mom and pops in Decula and the growth of the company, it was not working out. And that's where MIS, we had an office manager at the time named Tammy Hook, and she interviewed MIS in June of 2004. So we've been with MIS for 22 years now. And MIS had what we needed at the time, and that was support people that worked around the clock. It wasn't just one guy that, if he was on vacation, good luck getting your system up and running. So I tell that story to say, as you're growing, as much as you think you want to hold on to your vendors, especially your overhead vendors, you got to move on. You got to move to the next level, or your company will move to the next level.
Yeah, and that's sometimes hard to do, right? Because you're very loyal to the people who got you there. And it's very difficult to say, hey, it's time for me to let you go, and I gotta step up because we gotta step up, right? And that's not an easy thing to do. And I think, to your point, a lot of people hang on maybe a little bit too long.
And what happens there, Liam, is we call it the brother-in-law syndrome.
Mm.
Whether it's your brother-in-law or not, you feel like you owe that mom and pop vendor because he helped you get started. But in effect, he doesn't have the vision that you've had. He's not adding people. He's not adding what you need for resources. And y'all were small at the time, but you had the resources to do what we needed to do.
Yeah, well, that's probably a great lesson, right? And I think, another thing that to me really set you guys apart, and it's certainly something that I've paid attention to over the last 20-something years for you guys, is that you guys never wanted to be a Me Too player. And by that, what I mean is, in whatever industry you're in whatever thing that you're doing, there are lots of people all doing it the same way. They all do the same thing. They're all competing for the same customers. They're all charging the same amounts of money, right? Because essentially they're just cogs in the wheel, right? You've got this guy and that guy, and they both either do the same thing, or at least they say they do the same thing, right? And so it really becomes a commodity. But I think that one of the things that we learned with working at Advantage is that you guys didn't play that game. You guys went the other way, right? You guys went the way of saying, we're specialists, we're unique, we're going to carve out our own niche. And whether it's true or not, we believe that people will pay for our expertise, right? And I'd love to hear a little bit about your decision. Like, why did you do that? And if you think back on that decision, how has it helped you?
We always were trying to there's always between 30 and 45 protection companies around the city of Atlanta. And I've seen a ton of them come and a ton of them go. And we were as good as anybody at doing spec office building, finish build out, things everybody else did. But then we made a conscious decision in the early 2000s to get into medical kind of work, where there was medical office buildings, hospital wings. They're more difficult to do because the density of all of the things that are in the ceiling that you never see, whether it's gas lines to a doctor's office, whatever it is. A lot of people don't want to be in that space. So that was the first space that we really got in. A lot of people don't want to be in. It's just complicated to deal with. And over time, and where we are now, and this started probably about a decade ago, in and around the region that we live in here in Atlanta, data centers have become big time resources for all the IT, cloud, AI, all the stuff that the world's looking for now. And that we just happened to work for a general contractor, Brasfield and Gorey, they got neck deep in the data centers right out of the chute. And we've hung on, rode those coattails as much as we can. And we've actually done several data centers for other contractors. So we feel like if we're not the best data center fire protection contractor in Atlanta, we're close.
You're close, right? And so that really has kind of put you in your own niche, right? You know that old saying, right? There's riches and niches, right? And you really think about it, see, and you think about that story you just shared about, you know, these medical buildings, right? I always feel like, you know, there's not only riches and niches, right? If you find that certain vertical and you really become that expert at serving that vertical, but I think too that in any business, whatever it may be, there's always work that people don't want to do, right? It's not glamorous, it's dirty, it's sweaty, I don't know. There's something about it that the people don't want to do. It's too basic, whatever it is, right? And so I think that in your example of that medical facilities, right? These were complicated because there were explosive gas in the ceiling. It was really cramped in there. It probably, you know, was a little bit more difficult. I'm assuming the liability of working on a job like that was a lot more than working on a warehouse or something like that, right? And so you're like, hey, I'm going to go into this high risk environment that's not comfortable, that, you know, it's hard to get what we got to get done because that ceiling is just packed with all kinds of stuff, right? And so these had their own challenges, and you're like, not only are we going to do it, not only are we going to embrace it, but we're going to get good at doing it, right? And I think that when you kind of think about it in those terms, all of a sudden what it did was you took something that everyone else hated to do, and you're like, and we're going to specialize in that. We're good at doing it. And you became known for doing that thing, right? And so I think that that's a great example all the way through to, you know, what you guys are doing today with data centers, right? Data centers are probably a great parallel at a different scale, right? But data centers are really complicated. These data centers have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment in it, right? And you guys make one mistake or you know, do something wrong. There's a lot of liability involved in that. And I think that, you know, when people are like, hey, I can go do this warehouse over here, or I can go do this data center over here. Now, this data center is going to feed me really good, but my goodness, if I make a mistake, we're going to be bankrupt. And so this warehouse starts to look really, really attractive, right? And I think to me, it kind of talks about risk. And from my own experience, and I'm sure from yours, I never talked to an entrepreneur that at some point throughout their entire history of owning that company hasn't taken some major risks, right? Things that they're like, if we can do this right, it's going to get us to the next level. If we do this wrong, we might not survive, right? And so, you know, you've got to have a little bit of vision, a little bit of faith in what you're doing to be able to put everything on the line like that. Can you share maybe a couple of times or thoughts where you guys have had to really kind of put it on the line like that?
One of the first data centers we did was west of town here in Atlanta in an organization called QTS that does this for a living. And for those of y'all who do not know what a data center is, it's basically a warehouse full of computer servers. That's what it is. And you can imagine the people that invest in these data centers, they don't like, the main form of fire protection that we're in is water-based. Well, waters don't mix well with computers. So that said, the first line of defense in a data center is what we call a nitrogen system. And so when you introduce gas fire protection ahead of water, what nitrogen does is eliminate the oxygen in the space, and that kills the fire. And it keeps the water off the servers. So that's the first line of defense. The second line of defense is a sophisticated, what we call a dry system. It's called a pre-action system. So the water, even though the pipes are above the servers, they're dry. They don't have any water in them. They're cut off at the valves. Now, if a sprinkler head goes off, the water comes through the valve and puts the fire out. If the nitrogen system didn't get that. So you have, those are all levels of risk where a lot of people, they just don't have the ability to put all those systems in, and more importantly, put them together. And that's what makes fire protection safety in a data center work.
Yeah. I think through that, and I think about the education that you guys didn't just show up on Tuesday and you were like, hey, got a great idea, right? You guys probably had to put some thought and some effort into that. And I know that probably through the 34 years that you guys have been in business, one of the things that has been really important is developing relationships with vendors, right? Because these guys are, in some sense, your past, your present, and your future.
Yes.
And share a little bit about, your vendor process and what you guys did and how maybe they helped you or hurt you, or, what would you tell someone else when they're thinking about or looking at their vendors? How could they be successful?
I think what you have to be careful with, we have never had our own fabrication shop. That's a big deal that's a major decision for a fire protection company to make. Our platform company that owns us now has always had their own fabrication shop. And I say that to say that a lot of our other vendors come through that fab shop. And I'll give you an example. There's a mechanical coupling company called Victaulic, and that brand's known pretty well in mechanical circles of any kind. And one thing Victaulic's not is the cheapest. They have the best product, but they're not the cheapest. And we've just always made a conscious decision to use it because whatever corner you cut to buy a cheaper coupling, it's going to cost you down the road, but it's going to leak somewhere, somehow. So those kind of decisions, if you're going to be a quality company, it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it. And if you have to bite the bullet and pay a vendor like that a little more money to make sure you have quality on all your jobs, it helps a lot when what we call all butts and go backs. We cuts a lot of that out.
Yeah. Do you feel like that? I think all of us would like to be able to provide the very best products, right? The primo, because in every industry, there's always a vendor that makes the best, right? And I think all of us want to have really great, products and services, right? And so you go out and you research who's the best, and you start buying from these vendors that make the best of whatever it is that they do. Do you find that makes you uncompetitive though in terms of pricing?
I don't think so. And I'll give you a good contemporary example. There was a company the middle of last year that came out of Texas, and they were going to put a data center in Dalton, Georgia. If you're not familiar with Georgia's geography, that's in northwest, far northwest Georgia. And somehow they came to town and asked who knew how to do, who was the best fire protection for data center. And here we go. Now we're the vendor. And so they call us and they want a price from us. And sure enough, we got the job. So a lot of that, if you become, whether you're using the vendor or you are the vendor, if you don't have the reputation of doing that work well, and you're introduced to somebody new, especially coming from another region, good luck trying to land that business, because I'll give them the best price. If they haven't seen your work and seen you do it, they're very uncomfortable as a new person.
So I think what I hear you saying is, for the customer you have today, it may cost you a little bit more. Now you're going to have a quality product, but I think you have to understand that part of what you're buying in that transaction is reputation, right? And that reputation is going to extend into your future, and it's going to build a brand that allows other people to recognize, and they're going to want to be part of it.
And I highly doubt we were the low price for the company coming from Texas. I doubt we were. I don't know that for a fact, but they have a product, and we're a form of their insurance because we're the fire protection. So they're not going to pay double, but they're not against paying a little bit of a premium to make sure they get a quality product.
Sure. What do you think is maybe one of the most painful lessons that you learned over the last 34 years?
I tell you one we learned when we were still in Lawrenceville back in the day. This was probably year 2 or 3. And as I said earlier, we leased in an industrial park anyway. And there was a warehouse going in about a mile behind our office was. And it happened to be a refrigerated warehouse. If you're not familiar with that, that's a little bit different deal, because if you do refrigerators and freezers, they're either at freezing, maybe 40 degrees, but if it's a freezer, obviously it's below 30 degrees. Anyway, they have special designs. There's because of the piping and the heads on it. And we had taken on a new designer, I won't get into that part, but he supposedly knew what he was doing, and supposedly had done one before. But for whatever reason, we didn't design it well. We installed that design, and before that building ever got opened up good, we got called on the carpet. And again, I don't even think we were 3 years old, and we ate $100,000 to make that right. It was $100,000 we didn't have. Now that wouldn't be a big deal today. Nobody wants to eat $100,000.
Yeah.
We could eat a lot better today. We could eat. And
Sure.
but if you're going to be the quality player in the environment, sometimes you got to bite the bullet.
Yeah. I think that you really bring up two interesting points. One is, being a great company does not mean you don't make mistakes, right? Let's be honest. All of us, we're companies full of people, full of human beings, and we're not trying to make mistakes, but sometimes things happen, right? And I think that, in that story that you're sharing, it's really about how do you react to that, right? Are you going to make it right, even at significant expense to yourself? And sometimes that expense, it might be really painful, right? It's not like, it's not like we can just write a check and move on. This might actually be, hey, we've got a decision to make. We can make this right, or we can make payroll, right? Some of these decisions might be really difficult to make. And yet, as an owner, you still have to figure out, how can you do both? And that might mean you need to go to the bank, right? Or do something to make it right. But inevitably, making it right, it is really important, even at significant expense, right?
One other thing I would say in this particular instance, even though Rayco was our landlord, and they were obviously leasing this to the refrigerated company, they were also a customer of ours. And had we not handled that, we probably wouldn't have done much more work for them. And over the years, we did a lot of really good, proper work for them. So sometimes you have to bite the bullet today to make it over the bridge to tomorrow.
I think that's also a good point. And I suspect that you guys learned a little bit out of that, like we all do. All right. And you get better and you move on. All right. If you think about your business, you guys have really gone through this full arc, everything from we started a business to we were at the height of our, of what we did, all the way now into all those, I don't want to say a sunset, but I'm going to say like a next chapter, right? Where, from my viewpoint, you guys grew a really nice business. You guys got to the point where you knew what you were doing. You had employees who had stayed with you a long time. You had policies and procedures. You had developed ways of doing things like you knew your stuff, right? And just like these prospects knew your reputation, I suspect that your competitors did too, right? And you guys started to become very attractive to them as they're thinking about either how do they expand their business or how can they, expand their services into things that they don't do. And you guys kind of went down that path of now, partnering with another company and doing that in a unique way. I'd love to hear your perspective. How did all of that come about? And how do you feel about that? going from like, I'm the guy, I'm the owner, I call the shots, right? To now I'm part of something that's bigger than me, right? Because if I look at my own experience, that would be difficult for me, right? Because, I own MIS. I, for right or wrong, for better or for worse, I made all the decisions, right? And so it's kind of part of your identity, right? And at some point you start to think about, I'm going to share that with someone else, and I may no longer be in control of my own destiny. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I spoke earlier of my business partner, Dalton Knotts, and when we had been together 27 years at the time, and he was really getting to a point in his life for reasons I won't get into, that he was ready to do something else with his life. He'd been in fire protection for over a quarter of a century, and he was ready to do other things. And so when he was going to sell his half out completely, I knew I was going to end up being a minority partner. There was no way around that. So I wanted to make sure, my goal was to make sure, as you speak of them, are employees that have been loyal to us for some of them for the whole time, that they got a good deal too. So we made a conscious decision to be bought strategically, not financially. So we tried to do the best we could so everybody would win. And while we're almost 7 years into that venture now, everything's not perfect anymore. It was perfect before we went with the other company. But if you're going to have a corporate leader, so to speak, I don't know how we could have done any better. I think almost 7 years into it, I think most of our employees would say they're happy with their progression. And it really helped a lot of things. Dalton and I never had the capital. When you run a small to medium-sized business, you just don't have the kind of capital that our two owners have now. And so it just made, I feel like it's been a win-win for everybody.
I kind of feel like it's the difference between playing high school football and joining the NFL, right? Because you guys went for, how many, you guys had what? I don't remember, 80 people, 100 people maybe, right? And now you joined a company that had like 1,600 people, right? And so it was a big difference, right? You like, you went from, I know everybody, and these people have been here for decades, and like, we're good, to like, now I can't, like, I don't even know everyone's name, right? And you're playing a much bigger ball here,
yeah,
right? And so that must be a scary thing to do. Do you, I don't want to say regret it, but do you sometimes miss when you guys were little and you were the guy?
I do. I miss that part of it, but I'll speak, I'm starting to age a little bit, and a lot of times you just don't have maybe quite the drive and energy you had when you were younger. And as you grow through the different stages of business, a lot of people we've hired over the way have taken stuff off of us anyway. And now that we're growing the organization like we are now, where I understand, I just heard a couple of weeks ago, I think there's close to 2,200 employees company wide. So that's a pretty big organization.
It is.
So we're 175 of that, and so we're still in the game, so to speak. But like you say, entrepreneurially, you make all the decisions and you take all the consequences. And now that's not the case, because you still make a lot of decisions, but they're corporate driven, and so most of the arenas.
Yeah. The other side of that, though, is, I would guess, now, I've never been through this, right? But I would guess that while that's true, if you think about this from the employee perspective, if I was one of those 175 people, right? Their opportunities for their growth in their career has probably skyrocketed, right? They have opportunities to do things today that maybe they didn't have the opportunity. And I'm actually thinking about one of your people who, joined Advantage. They were relatively new, that meaning that they weren't one of these folks who'd been with you for a few decades, but she was able to get in, understand Advantage, add some value to Advantage. But because Advantage is now, part of this larger company, that larger company looked at her and said, we like what we see. We value the talents that we have, and we think that we have a bigger, better place for her, right? Than just being part of these 175 people. And she's gone on to do bigger, better things. And so, I think the other side of this, from my perspective, is that these 175 people now have bigger, brighter futures, all within that same landscape than maybe what they had before.
I think that's very true. I think one thing that drove the situation that you're speaking of, we kept our accounting software the first 3 years of our now ongoing 7-year relationship. And so she, at that particular time, because we were still running our accounting out of Winder, she had a full-time job. And then as we switched over to Century's accounting system, which was Microsoft driven, and the hub of accounting now is done in Duluth. We don't. All we do is AR and AP under our roof now. So she had really lost a lot of hours about supporting our original software and so forth. And our platform company had already started using her on that. When they would acquire companies, she would be the troubleshooter going in to change them over. So she had made herself valuable with the downtime she had from not having to support our original software, which was Sage. And I'm really glad. I hope she, that happened a couple of months ago, and I don't think she liked leaving Advantage, but she likes the challenge because she needs to be challenged.
Yeah. And I think that that's really great, right? And so as I try and land the plane here, if you were to give 3 pieces of advice, think about your entire 34 years history, right? What would you tell that guy who is just thinking about starting a company? What would you tell that guy who is in the middle of running his company and he feels like maybe he's alone, or maybe the burden of running that company is heavy, right? We've all been there. And you think about that guy who's maybe a little older and he's thinking about partnering with somebody, maybe selling his company and retiring. What one piece of advice would you give to each of the 3 of those people?
Well, the first piece of advice I would give is the younger you are, I think you're overestimating the amount of risk you're taking. I think now when you're where Lliam and I were one day, it seems that risk seems very high. But now that I'm on this side looking back, there's always risk, on any decision in life. But I say take the leap as young as you possibly can. Build your company as fast as you can, make as many mistakes as you can. The faster you make the mistakes, the more you learn how to do it right. And I would say sell that company as fast as you can, as long as you feel like you're getting value for it. And the reason I would say that is you're young enough where maybe you can feel like maybe it's something you really want to do when you grow up. And I think the faster you go through those cycles, the better. That was the first part. What was your second part?
And so this is the guy who's just starting out, right? Or maybe thinking about, doing company. Now there's that guy who's in the middle of his career, like, and you and I know, right? Like, being a CEO is an incredibly responsible position. There's not a lot of people you can turn to unless you have a relationship with another CEO and you could say, hey man, here's where I'm at. What do you think? Right. But there's not, you're it. Right. And so when you're thinking about that guy, what's that one piece of advice that you get?
The one piece of advice I would say in the middle is you always want to do the right thing, because you want your professional reputation in the company to be of high character. But as you build, in our case, when you have 175 people, you have to have strong middle management team. And so as they were being groomed, like I have a half dozen people that still answer to me now. And as they were being groomed as middle management, more and more, I consciously would answer their question with a question.
Mm.
And the importance of that is when I answer their question with a question, then they'll answer it. And they tend to answer it the way they know you want to hear it. And that's what they learn to do it on their own. And that was important in the middle.
And I can certainly identify with that, right? When you're the guy with all the answers, it's a lot easier for people to come and ask you because it's like instant gratification, right? I have a question, I ask Andy, I walk away, problem solved. There was no angst in me having to figure that out. But at some point when I go and I talk to Andy, and I know before I even get there, he's about to give me some homework or he's about to go send me on a booster, but I'm not walking away with the answer, right? I think what it does is it forces you to stretch and grow. And not only I think does it buy you time as a CEO, and I think it actually helps develop your people where one day they truly can operate without you, right? And I think that at least in my journey, that has been transformational.
No doubt.
Right? Because let's be honest, there's one of me and one of you, right? And so you have to have some way to push some of this down where people can own certain parts of the business, right? And for me, if I could just add on to this from my own experience, I think peer groups are really important, right? Getting involved in a Vistage or whatever might be around for whatever vertical you're in, being around like-minded people that are going through the same journey and the same struggles that you are, it's comforting to know that, like, if I have a problem, I have a relationship, I have a friend that I could call or talk to, or sometimes maybe I think I'm just fine. But me sitting around that conference room table and listening to everyone else's problems, it gives me insights into things that I hadn't even thought about yet, right? And so I think having a peer group is really important.
No doubt.
And then if we kind of move forward to that guy who had his in a business for a long time, he's thinking about exiting or selling or partnering or whatever it is he wants to do. I think that particularly when that company has become part of your identity, it's who you are, right? You are the owner of Advantage Fire, right? You're the guy, you're the man, you call the shots, everyone answers to you. Like, I mean, it's hard to not say like that doesn't become part of your identity.
No doubt.
Right. And I think making that transition, it's hard to come face to face with, I'm not that guy anymore, right? And, well, what would you say to that guy?
I think I've already shared this once, so I'll get back into this. When Dalton were to move on, and I think a big part of it is more to make sure you hear this trend part of your life is there's all kinds of names for it, but I'll say take your chips off the table. That's the way you hear it said. And I think you can be selfish with that and just make sure you get the top dollar, for your efforts of energy you put in the company over the years. But I think in our particular case, we wanted to make sure our employees moving forward also benefited from it. And I believe they have. Now, one piece of advice I'd give that we did not do, if depending on what industry you're in and what space you're in the economy, if you can't do that, I have a lot of friends in contracting now that have moved to ESOPs. And an ESOP is a great way to share the wealth that you've been blessed to accumulate with your employees. And I just know this because I have friends and actually have businesses that have gone down the ESOP trail, and they're really happy with their decision because they feel like that helped their employees benefit too. We weren't able to do that in our situation, but I do feel like back then their lives, if anything, have gotten better on a day-to-day basis, even if whether they're answering to me or not.
Yeah, that's very fair. Andy, thank you for coming in and spending an hour with us and sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, your experience, being so open and transparent. I really appreciate our friendship, and I really appreciate you really just coming in and being so open and about where you've been and what you've done. So thank you.
I appreciate our personal and professional relationship over the last 2 decades. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you.